All right. Oh, everybody's so far away. You're so far away down there. Hey, how's it going? All right. Well, I think I've got the easiest gig here today. We have, this panel is just about views of the future. So basically, I can just ask, what do you think of the future, and sit back and let them talk. And hopefully, someone will mention something about jetpacks, because I'm really interested in those being in my immediate future. But what we're going to do here is hopefully have a really lively discussion. My name is Chris Albrecht, and I am an editor with the GigaOM network. And I'll just go through and introduce who we have here today. We have Bill Phelps with Accenture, Petterson with Impact Radius, Jim Sink with Avatar Reality, and I'm going to butcher your name, and I apologize. Peter Möckel with Deutsche Telekom. Perfect. Oh, yeah, awesome. And then down at the end, we have James Fallon, who is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral science at UC Irvine, and is also here with NeuroRepair. So I want to kick off, Facebook's in the news lately for a lot of different reasons. I don't want to get into anything too controversial on that side, but more just, they have 450, 500 million users. Twitter is all a Twitter now. Everybody's twittering and tweeting. How does the social web and this kind of influx of connectivity amongst people impact your particular area of business? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Bill, right here. How does this impact, how do all these people interacting impact Accenture, and how you go and interact with clients, and how you go about your business? And how will it down the road?
It's thanks, Chris. It's probably longer than a 2-second or even a 2-minute answer, but a couple of quick thoughts. First off, my day job is running the security practice for Accenture in all of North America. So social media is very, very day in and day out issue for me and my clients and the work that I do. But just from a couple dimensions, one, educating people in organizations how to use social media appropriately from a work context. Don't walk out of a meeting with a client and post on Facebook, I just had the worst meeting with my client. We had that happen, and I'm sure other people have had similar things. On the other hand, the opportunity for improved connectivity within our organization, with clients, reconnecting with business people, on a social level as opposed to purely on a professional level, is very powerful. I saw a post from John Hagel, who was up here a little while ago, looking for case studies of productivity. I don't know how to measure it, but it's very clearly there. And then on a very tactical, transactional level, we're using Twitter and LinkedIn particularly extensively from a recruiting standpoint, an awareness standpoint, a PR and media. So I think everything from we're changing, policy and behavior, societal norms, to very transactional stuff. It's pervasive.
All right, Per, how does this kind of social movement? How is this impacting how you are going to be planning, like, advertising and
Sure.
and management down the road?
Okay. Well, a big trend right now is it used to be all about Google, and Google was the only source of business for companies in the internet sector. And one of the most astonishing facts I heard recently was a pretty large company which now Facebook had bypassed as the primary source of ad-driven revenue for the company. So certainly the sheer amount of time people spend inside of these type of environments, and the amount of ad impressions that exist inside of the people that are interfacing with their social graph, being on Facebook or on their cell phone device, it's an astonishing new advertising medium. If you combine that with the behavioral capabilities and the amount of data that consumers freely are giving up to be used for targeting, this will end up enabling hyper-targeted ad campaigns, and certainly it's a very, very rapid trend that's really changing our business.
How far away do you think that is? I mean, behavioral targeting is something we've heard about for a long time.
I think that's a reality right now, and obviously it's just gonna accelerate with. There appears to be no consumer pushback on the concept of these companies having complete access to your personal data, and the sheer lift in economics. When you have access to that type of data and response rates, it's going to drive a massive adoption rate of behavioral targeting in all media. I think in the future, I think the dots are going to get connected in a pervasive computing environment where your TV screen, or you consume media in a network-connected computer. Your identity is essentially known across all your devices, and advertisers are targeting you based on your searches you've done recently on your computer, whatever it is. But it's both scary and obviously as an advertiser, a tremendous opportunity. But I think it's to a large extent here right now. It's not in the future, but it's always going to be a very accelerating trend.
All right.
Unless there's major clashback from the consumer, which I don't think is going to happen.
Okay, so you don't see that happening?
I don't see that happening. I'm not seeing any credible threat against, even, right now, I think both Google and Yahoo do this right now, do search retargeting. So based on your search terms you did the same day, you see ads on the web based on your recent searches. Obviously, massive invasion of privacy, but a tremendous opportunities for marketers that now get access to your inner desires, I guess. What are you looking for?
Uh-oh. Jim, you Avatar Reality does, social environments and gaming. How are you seeing this kind of increased socialness, for lack of a better term? How is that playing out, and how do you see that playing out in the future, and how are you shaping your business to kind of meet that future?
Well, one of the things that we do at Avatar Reality is try to create communities, persistent, immersive communities. And these social tools like Twitter in particular help us accelerate that. We try to stay agnostic, that we can plug in really anything that people want to use and be as compatible as we can be. So if you use Twitter a lot or use Facebook, those things can work equally well in that persistent 3D environment. So every time someone signs up for those things, it's a wonderful thing for us. It just gives us a new avenue to communicate. Where they'll be in 5 years, I'm not sure. I think any acceleration of their deployment just makes it easier for us to connect people, so it's a great thing.
Okay, so you're just looking for that to keep going up and up and up.
The more the better.
Okay. Now, all these bits of data have to get there. So Peter, can you talk a little bit from your work with Deutsche Telekom, like what about the infrastructure to handle all of these social interactions? Where do you see that going, and how are you guys preparing for that?
I think some of the debates around privacy and security have actually exposed some of the fundamental weaknesses of the internet architecture underneath it. And one soapbox I'd like to climb on is that we need to do something about the underlying architecture and not just bolt on security to the applications. And I think we've taken our eyes off that ball in the past 10 or 15 years and haven't really done anything about security at the architecture level of the internet. And all know that anecdote that the internet was designed to survive a nuclear war. But of course, in nuclear war, the enemy is outside the network. The enemy is in Russia. And now the basic assumption that that any node of the internet is trustworthy doesn't hold anymore. And we're seeing that this is really a fundamental thing we need to address now. And we can't just bolt on security as an afterthought to the application layer or any intermediate protocol layer of the internet. And I think the privacy debate we're getting now has really exposed this fundamental weakness. And that's something that we as operators, but also the equipment manufacturers, the data center providers, and also the venture capitalists must address. And if we don't do this, I think then, for instance, Chinese manufacturers of equipment will very soon address these topics and will take the control over these standards out of our hands.
What about just from the basic level, like from the pipes? Do we got the pipes to handle all this, or is the underlying infrastructure there? I mean, I realize security is, there's not a need for security if my tweet isn't getting to where it's supposed to go because it's down again. So do you see, how do you see things in terms of infrastructure heading?
Capacity, I'm sure the capacity will be built, the capacity will be there. And of course, the social networks are not that much the driver of demand for capacity. That is certainly video, and video. That is the overarching driver for the need for capacity, and which will dwarf anything else. So certainly when the demand is there, the capacity will be there. And I'm sure all the regulatory debates leading to that point will be solved. And if the demand is there, we will provide the capacity. We love that, of course, as carriers. We love building large infrastructures, running large infrastructures, and when the demand is there, we will provide that.
More fiber. Woo.
Yes, we've currently, and I'm an engineer, and I don't apologize for that. And I'm very, very happy that, for instance, our company in Europe has now publicly committed to building out fiber, which is great because we've burned our boats now. The debate is over. We've said we do fiber, and now we do fiber.
Last mile to the consumer.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's very important that these debates end, and that's clearly the only way forward. And fiber is the only way to satisfy that demand in the future.
Okay. James, I want to take a bit of a different attack with you. You know, in looking at social webs and social interactions, just as sort of a broad question. I mean, you study the brain, you understand the brain. How is this impacting our brains? Our constant need to Twitter or check a news feed or post photos of ourselves, these social interactions. How is that reshaping our brain, or does it pose a danger for the brain? Or
Well, you've said it already. It's more fiber.
Hey.
The question of connections in the brain and how they're altered. You know, there is some plasticity. So social media, from video games to Facebook, and how we interact through technology with other people, is affected by a couple of things. It's the type of media, your personality type, and that's all basically, it has to do with personalized medicine, really. The way we look at it, the way a biologist and somebody in psychiatry would look at it, is that we know now that every human being is different. There's quadrillions of types of human beings genetically. I mean, if there was no environmental interaction, everybody would be different. And there is no such thing as an identical twin now, because we know from copy number variants. So you can't even count on twins to act identically. So when I'm listening to the conversation, I'm thinking of in what we've just seen. For example, Larry Smarr has Cal IT Squared, and we work with the Hyperwall, and we tried to see how social networking with that media, the huge media of Hyperwall, would change our interaction. Now, we were looking at those genes that are involved in schizophrenia. And normally what we were doing would take 2 years to look for them. And we sat down and put all the data up. We worked with the guy that was one of the creators of the Minority Report thing. So I stood up there and was flipping all these, you know, the brains around according to the genotype and everything. And I'll tell you, within 2 days, I was writing the patent and writing the paper on 2 new genes we had found in schizophrenia that would have taken 2 years. And it had everything to do, first of all, with the sort of Magister Ludi thing. We're sitting there as a social group, right? And so we had domain experts there, and they just let us go free, right? And the other important thing is that the media was huge, and so it filled every part of our visual field. So the patterns you see here with central vision on a small screen is much different than what you see on a huge screen. So if you're looking for creativity, so the way you interact with media or the video has to do with creativity, you want the biggest screen possible, because the patterns you see out here in Spooky Land's visual space are very different. And in fact, the patterns jumped out here, not in central vision. And so if you're talking about creativity, that would be one thing. The other thing I would think about is in terms of 3D, real 3D, the way that interacts with the genome will be very important, because, you know, our mirror neuron system, you basically, what you're watching, if it's in 3D, not in 2D. This is why film, TV doesn't really affect people that much, you know, emotionally. But in real good 3D, it's like you're there, and the kids that are susceptible, genetically susceptible to violence, will react as if they're sitting there as a part of a terror plot. And some people will not react, many people will, but those that have those high-risk genes for violence probably will be affected by, the better that, you know, it gets, the more their emotional brain will be affected. And then there's ways that everybody's a bit different, where this media, this, you know, the social media, the actual stuff we're looking at, will speak to different parts of the brain. One affecting the narrative, you know, what's the story of me looking at this? What's the story of me interacting? Versus the immediate experience, which is the non-dominant hemisphere. So there are ways of looking at this that you probably, I think in the future, be able to specifically shape the type of people and, you know, and how you put it. What part of the brain, what part of their genome, if you will, their epigenome, are you talking to? And do you want to encourage social interactivity through it, or it's self-narrative? So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go with that.
That's literal big data, like when you're up on the wall and you see things.
Oh, yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
You know, Jim, I want to talk to you for a second about, you know, everything is accelerating, and so things get faster, and we have faster feedback loops. And how does something cross over from, so Second Life, you know, seemed to hit really big, and then you don't really hear about it anymore. And so how do you determine, as you're putting together avatar reality, what's a fad versus something crossing over and becoming more permanent?
We're betting on fun. We're betting on
Always
community.
a good bet.
I don't think those are fads. Never bet against fun. And I think one opportunity that they missed was they were, I think, concerned that people wouldn't take them seriously or that they wouldn't use it for applications beyond fun. And they said, well, we're not a game. Game is not a dirty word. If you have kids, if you've seen anybody who's grown up with games, it's part of our lives. And games doesn't mean Mario necessarily. It can mean things like achievement and social recognition and leveling. These concepts, these game concepts, are going everywhere. I mean, you see them popping up now in things like Foursquare, for example, where you get recognized for doing simple things like saying, I'm here. Those simple game mechanics are going to be incredibly pervasive. It won't be long until we see them in Windows, till we see them in Office, till we see them in Gmail. Everyone likes to be rewarded. And even if it's just a way to go, you did something you've never done before, it's a powerful thing. So when we were talking before, you said, well, is Facebook a fad? Well, I don't know if anything 500 million can be a fad. I get a strange feeling about it, but that might just be because when something gets really big, we start to wonder. It might just be the Walmart effect. I don't know. But I do think long term, especially when we look at young people who've grown up with interactive entertainment being core of their time, those game aspects are going to become more and more pervasive in all the things that we do. And I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts about immersion. I mean, for us, it's 3D and game and community. And we talk about immersion. What we've discovered is people will not sacrifice convenience for immersion, or rarely will they sacrifice convenience for immersion. People will take a grainy YouTube video over Blu-ray because it happens right away. If we can combine those things, if we can give that instant response with the beauty and the immersion of a 3D environment, I think we'll have something really compelling.
See, I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea of games, and I want to talk to Per and Bill here. So, you know, the idea of Foursquare and Gowalla and turning your everyday routines into games is very hot right now. But games always end and people find new games. How do you, when you're talking to clients, how do you fish out kind of what are the buzzwords that everybody wants to hear or that your client might want to hear versus what are the things that you know where the hockey puck is going to be? How are you filtering that as you look ahead into the future? How are you providing that kind of service for your client?
Well,
and that might be your special sauce,
question,
but I'm just
yeah. Do we provide that service to our clients? Do we tell them the future? I guess we don't, but we make bets. We make bets, and I think in our business we tend to bet on things that are proven. There's a lot of media channels and a lot of new concepts that come and go, and we've had a history of just betting on. Once it hits a certain critical scale, then bet on it. There's the first mover advantage. It's not so strong.
Is that just a quantity thing? Is it just once it hits a certain
size,
number?
It's a size. Obviously, there's a level of analysis too. I mean, how sustainable is it? What's the barriers of entry? What are the possible substitutions? Maybe social gaming is a good example. I mean, is that going to be the way of the future? I don't know if I would bet my life on social gaming being the biggest business on the planet based on kind of the growth rates we've seen. But I think things that we know are happening, and it's definitely put it that way. What do we know? What are we betting on? I think the mobile internet, mobile access to data and content, mobile consumption of content, and kind of the switch to the consumer-driven model where they're consuming whatever content when they want it on whatever device they want. That's something I would bet on. And I think I don't know if you've seen the graph of how fast the mobile internet and kind of internet minutes spent on the cell phone, how fast it's growing, and compare it to how fast the internet grew. It's astonishing. It's unbelievable how fast this new trend is happening. That's something I put my money on.
Yeah, I was going to say it's an interesting question of how do you help clients see the future somewhat. I work a lot with corporate and government IT organizations, and it's a cliche that we heard probably some aspect of in most of the panels, but I use the term the consumerization of IT. But if you want to know what's going to happen in corporate and government IT, look at what high school kids are doing. Look at what young adults are doing. Look at what's going on with the social internet.
So smoking back behind the bleachers during lunch, that's going to be
it's
Justin Bieber.
it's we tell a story, like a lot of professional services organization, we have start groups or cohorts of young people that join in a particular office at a particular time, usually during the summer, not quite so much as it used to be. And there's a story that's told that I haven't validated, but I've heard it enough places that I believe it's true, that in our Paris office, we had a group of people start, and about 6 weeks after they'd started, corporate IT was confused because none of these people had activated their email accounts. And it turned out they'd all just set up a Facebook group for, Accenture Paris Start Group, July 22nd, 2009, and that we're communicating back and forth on each other's walls.
Interesting.
We are, and, I don't think we're a leading Yammer user, but we're a significant Yammer user. We're deploying various social media technology internally. There's a raging debate, about, I'll call it, walled garden social media within an organization versus adoption of mass technology. But I really think that it's, when I started my career in the 80s, technology started in the, university and went to the corporation, and long after that, when the cost curve had, when you'd gone down the cost curve, it went into the consumer realm. We've reversed that entirely.
Interesting. Peter, how are you looking to build out networks to accommodate, how do you determine, how much you need, or, as you're looking at things down the road, trends down the road, how do you prepare from an infrastructure standpoint to meet those needs?
Fundamentally, I think you can never have enough bandwidth, and so that's why fiber is the only answer. And customers will demand more than full HD. Full HD is exactly not that. It's maybe half HD. Customers will demand.
How much is an HD signal? How many megabits?
Well, it depends on the compression and so on, but you need a 60 megabits per second ADSL2 plus connection to do proper HD. And customers will demand a 4K resolution in future, which is more. Then they will demand 3D. Then, of course, if you look 20 years out, you go to holographic displays, and then you will need not X by Y pixels, but X by Y by Z pixels. That's super.
So if everybody consumed, let's say, two movies a day or 2 hours of HD content, would the infrastructure now be able to support that?
Well, with fiber, with 100 gigabits per second, with 100 megabits per second, the first generation of GPON fiber, that would support that today.
Including the switching infrastructure to route the content?
Yes, that's certainly doable. That's not the problem. But we see that with multiple screens in the home, maybe holographic displays in the 2020s, you get to demands of 10 gigabits per second, 100 gigabits per second per household.
At the household?
At the household level, that's perfectly reasonable that we get to that point.
Amazing.
And that's why the demand for infrastructure will not go away, and that's why I'm saying as an engineer, I fundamentally believe that you can never have enough infrastructure.
Is it an infrastructure, or is it a hardware or software problem? So is it just getting more data down the narrower pipe, or is it at what level do you decide, well, we can't tear up the street anymore or install some kind of tower anymore? Where do you kind of draw your line in the sand?
Well, of course, the bottleneck. When you address one bottleneck, the next one will appear. But currently, certainly the bottleneck is the last mile. So it's about getting fiber to the home. It's about getting in the mobile network, getting to the next standard, getting to LTE, and getting more bandwidth also in the last mile in the mobile network. But once you've done that, then I think, again, you're back to architecture topics, such as that the internet wasn't designed to transport huge multimedia streams. So this sacred cow of packet switching that you decide for every packet at every hop along the way, which way it's going to take. That's not really ideal for transporting 2 hours of HD movies, where you do that for every packet, and it's a large number of packets. So I think architecturally, the internet has to evolve to some mixture of circuit switching and packet switching, such as flow switching, where for these very large flows, one route will be determined, and then the entire flow will follow that route. So once we've addressed these raw topics of access networks, we need to go to more architectural problems and also solve them.
Okay. James, I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, which is talking about narratives. And we as people now have the ability to control our own narratives more than we ever have before. So our reputations are not based on what others perceive of us, but we are now saying, hey, I am doing this, or I think this. So it's kind of all out there. And where do you see that going as people are now more in control of their own, the story they are telling, and it'll be augmented by like geolocation and augmented reality. That'll change not only the non-fiction narrative that I'm telling, but also the fiction narratives that I can tell as you can overlay information on city streets. That was alluded to a little earlier. But from kind of a psychological standpoint, how does this, in terms of the brain, how does this work? Where do you see this going?
Well, you could, if we could look at extreme examples here. You know, one of the consumers of games now is the military. So I work with special forces groups in extremist situations, small groups, how they interact on the ground, how they use Twitter, Facebook, everything. That has changed the nature of warfare, but also in the training. So there's a cognitive gym, and the thing is, it's a game. And if you talk with people who are really, you know, real Jedi Knights, who are real warriors, they said you can't create something real enough to make us believe this game. And so where the stakes are really high, you want, however you design the social interaction, it's got to be real enough to fool a Jedi Knight warrior, okay? And that really is an important thing. And there's a lot of money going into that, I may add. The other thing, I work with trainers for professional sports, and they want to know how you reinforce. What's the schedule which you reinforce somebody? And this gets into addiction too. You know, people getting addicted to games, people who tend to have obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's a fair number that are at the edge there. And it's, you know, how do you want to reinforce it, I guess in a socially responsible way, but also, you know, if you're trying to get somebody to get their batting average up to 320, you know, some professional baseball player, you know, it matters how you reinforce them in the game, right? And there's always this old idea in psychology about the magic number 7. And the magic number 7 is there are cells in the brain that will respond to 7 of anything. After that, you melt down. Right, so you know you can handle. I mean, even you know wolves and other animals. It's number 7 is kind of the maximal amount, but it's also the number of times that a loop that is made in the brain when you're reinforcing something. Let's say a game or an addiction. The 7th time through, your brain will take it seriously. Otherwise, and there's a certain circuitry there. So if I drop a dollar bill here, if that circuit wasn't there, you'd be back here every day for the next year looking for a dollar bill. So it's how to ignore things when you engage that loop to reinforce in the game. I mean, in the social affability, I guess, of it. And then when you push it too far and it becomes an obsession. For those people who are susceptible. Some people you can't obsess them at all. So.
What about identity when people are in these simulators, for example? You have situations where people are acting as themselves. I want to be represented as myself versus represented as an image that reflects me. How do people connect with that on a brain level? Is there a difference? Or is it all the same?
There's a difference. And in those first 2 examples, the extremist examples, where you have a soldier who has to react, they don't want a narrative. Mm-hmm. In a baseball player, who said, you don't want a narrative. You want to take the dominant hemisphere offline. You want the non-dominant hemisphere right there with global attention in an immediate way. Once you give the amount of time or the type of stimulus, you stimulate a certain part of the visual field or certain auditory stimuli, you get them into this narrative mode. Now, if you want to get them there, so you want to get them immediately immersed for a minute, then get them into a narrative mode. What am I doing here? Who am I interacting with? How am I doing in this game? They're talking to themselves. That's over in your dominant hemisphere. There are ways of doing this in psychology. Now, I don't know how it's done in gaming. And in fact, you guys know more about the social interacting and how media affects it than I do. I'm only guessing about the circuitry and how to. But there are ways of differentiating these different engagements of the emotional brain, the narrative brain, of the immediate brain, of the global brain, of the heat brain.
And this is all great, but we have got to go. We got to move on to the next panel. Please, round of applause for the panelists today. Thank you very much, gentlemen.